Welcome back to Behind the Badge. I'm still Garry McCarthy, and I have my very close friend here tonight, Steve McAllister. Steve and I go back a long way.
1989.
1989. So I had gone on a job in New York in 1981, and I played sports in softball leagues and a couple of rough touch tackle leagues that I played in. And all I kept hearing about was the NYPD football team. And they have a tackle team. It's called the National, well, back then it wasn't, but now it's the National Public Safety Football League.
Correct.
Which you became the king of, right? What
Yeah,
there was the emperor? What was the actual title?
So I was the president of the league, the first president in 1998 when we formulated the league with 6 teams.
Right.
LAPD, Houston PD, all the heads of the teams, we all got together and kind of worked out a formalized structure.
Right.
Team, it's grown to up to, I think they went to 24 teams. I think right now there's almost 20 still actively playing.
So in 1989, I got tired of listening to people say, oh, that guy's on the tackle team, he's really good. Oh, that guy's on the tackle team, he's really good. And I said, okay, I'm going to go down and play on the tackle team, even though I was 30 years old at the time. And who do I run into but AKA Big Sexy. The football team is loaded up with nicknames that will cover some of them. But Steve and I became great friends. We were both linebackers, and we worked together on more than a few occasions. So Steve, give a little background on yourself.
Sure. I came on the police department in 1984, 42 years now as a police officer. I did 26 with the NYPD. Then I followed you over to Newark when you brought me over to kind of help you develop your crime strategies and implement the crime strategies, which helped us reduce the crime and the violent crime, specifically is what we looked at.
I read in the book that Cory Booker did a great job on crime in,
good old Cory.
in Newark.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
He actually told me the smartest thing he ever did was hire 2 white Irish guys from New York, so we got to give him some credit.
I guess so. Yeah, but when people say I'm from New York, I say, no, I'm from the Bronx.
The Bronx. And I'm from Brooklyn.
Right. So just to be clear, if you're not familiar with the geography of New York City, the Bronx is the only part of New York City that's on the mainland.
It's part of New York State.
If we cut those bridges, they all float away. And
Brooklyn is an island.
Brooklyn is an island. It's part of Long Island, actually.
That's correct.
So anyway, that's just a little bit of background there. Go ahead.
So after I served with you for about 2 years, I got a call from somebody within the town government of my local town, Floral Park. And after some back and forth of hypothetical police situations, they ended up hiring me as the police commissioner, and I've been there now for 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've had a nice run. Floral Park is a great town. We have a small town, 16,000 residents. We have 34 uniformed cops and about 20 civilians, support staff. And the nice thing about Floral Park is almost well over 90% of my police officers are born and raised in Floral Park. So it's kind of unique that the sons and daughters of Floral Park are called now to service and protect their community. And I think they take a lot of pride in that, and it's a special relationship. And because of this, I think we also enjoy a high level of community support, which is obviously so important, that they have the faith in you to implement and do your job as a police officer.
Okay. All right, so I want to go back to the football for a few minutes because it's very, very amusing. We only play.
At least to us.
Yeah, not to our wives. Sometimes not to our children either. But it's a decent level of competition, and guys across the country generally have played a lot of football in their lives. A lot of D1 athletes. A lot of people played in college. Being a linebacker, I like to say, isn't necessarily a position on a football field. It's a way of life, right? And running into hard objects is something that Steve and I shared not only on the football field, but certainly in our careers. And it was funny that, we've got to find that picture, Steve. There's a picture of Steve and I making a tackle where there's two offensive linemen looking back at us.
Our
They
ancient
didn't
foe,
touch
the
us.
fire department.
Yeah, they didn't touch us, and we're crushing their running back. But I got to know Steve as a football player and as a friend. And fast forward years later, I'm a captain in the 20th Precinct on the Upper West Side, and Steve gives me a call, and we had stayed in touch over the years. And he says, "Hey Gary, I'm making lieutenant, and do you have any spots up there? Could I come up and work with you?" Now the 20 Precinct is a very nice neighborhood. It's on the
Beautiful,
Upper West
yeah.
Side of Manhattan. It's got Lincoln Center, and quite frankly, when I first got there, I was a little bit lost after growing up, if you will, in the police department's busiest precincts across the city, in the Bronx, and well, actually at that point it was only in the Bronx, and Steve was doing the same thing in that other place called Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But if you're going to own a restaurant, you have to start by working in the kitchen. And I didn't know it at the time that I was going to end up owning a couple of restaurants, and referring to police departments
exactly.
and commands throughout my career. But I was like, yeah, sure, Steve, come on up. Let's get together and get this going. And all of a sudden I found out that not only was he a good football player, but he was also a really good cop.
Thank
And
you.
not that I was shocked, but I was really pleasantly surprised. So that later on in my career, when I went over to Newark, I dragged him along and kind of replicated the job that I had as Deputy Commissioner Operations for the NYPD to kind of help me focus on crime strategy. But the culture of the football team is something that I really struggle to define, because you get so attached to these guys who you're playing ball with.
Yeah.
You got to be crazy to be a football player.
Well, we always call ourselves 1, 2, 3, family.
Yeah.
That's a big, that's
Yeah.
how we break a huddle, family.
Yeah, and the other thing is the culture of the team. There was no race.
No.
There was no age. And quite frankly, everything was in play, whether it was your mother.
Everything was fair game.
Everything was fair game, and nobody got insulted. And if they did get insulted, they kind of got run off the team, because we weren't going to have any of those tensions. So some of these guys, the nicknames to me are just incredible.
The King of Cleveland.
The King of Cleveland was one, and that was a story where we learned not to ever leave one of our guys behind if we went out to a restaurant or a bar or an event and everybody left. So I'm actually playing as deputy commissioner, which didn't really matter. What mattered was that I was a senior guy on the team.
Right.
And this one particular guy is at the bar, and everybody else is leaving. And I go over and I tap him on the shoulder, and he turns to me and he blurts out, "I'm the King of Cleveland." And we're in Dallas. I don't know what happened with those
He
cities.
had a few too many, and we had to make sure that he found his hotel room and laid his head down gently that night.
But we also had Private Pile, and that's not Gomer Pyle. That's Private Pyle from Full Metal Jacket. This guy loved running into people. We had the Experiment, which we kind of thought that somebody took a whole bunch of chromosomes and threw them into a blender and turned it on, and this is what came out. So we had Light Skin James.
LSJ.
LSJ.
He was a great guy.
We had another
Jimmy Myers.
Yeah, we had another guy whose skin tone was kind of pink, and he got nicknamed Veal.
No, Veal, actually, if you remember, he had a couple of beers in the sun down in Miami, in Florida, goes into the water, comes out of the water, and rolls in the sand. And he breaded himself like a veal cutlet.
Like a veal cutlet.
And that's how we got the nickname.
Is that right?
Veal, yes, absolutely.
I remember during the rookie shows, we made the rookies get wet and sandy and make them veal cutlets. But
yeah, that's right. Well, after that example, that's exactly what we did. We brought
veal
that over.
And chicken. Veal and chicken.
Exactly.
But, you get really attached to these guys because you spend a lot of time with them. You go through injuries, and some of them you actually work with, others that you really just play ball with for a while. And it was a great place to develop these relationships, that, you know, you're going to have for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I just told you today. I got a phone call from Joe Ryan after doing his, he retired as a sergeant out of narcotics in the NYPD. Then he went down and did a whole career after 9/11 with Coast Guard down in Florida. Just retired from the Coast Guard after a full career with them. And one of our friends unfortunately lost his son tragically, and we do a golf outing every year. And he called me up, he wants to come up for it this in June, at the end of June, from Florida, just to be with the boys, because we all still go out and support each other. You know, it's a great foundation that they've started, the Joe Fariso Foundation. It's fantastic, you know.
Joe's a great guy.
Yeah, Joe was a great kid. You know, we watched Joe grow up.
Yeah.
You know, coming to all our games.
But, you know, and it wasn't all fun and games. We had a number of tragedies.
Yeah.
We had, I think the worst tragedy that we had was Eric Hernandez.
Yeah, it was just, you know, we had two right after each other. It was Eric, which was horrific, and then Richie Going, which was, you know, he
Fell off
did
the roof.
roofing on the side, and as he was doing his roofing, and they were within days of each other.
And I just got to tell a story of Eric Hernandez because it's such a tragedy. Eric came down and played for us for 1 year, his rookie year, and he was an absolute stud running back.
Yeah, I came out of Sacred Heart University up in Connecticut, played to the D1 program.
Yeah, but he wasn't that big, and he wasn't
but he
big up top.
But he was solid.
But he was solid, and he kind of ran straight up. I thought he was going to get broken in half in the Phoenix game because those guys came into the league with I don't think there's steroid testing in Phoenix. And
but they had some boys who could play out there.
Yeah.
They had the one guy who had played for the Oakland Raiders.
Yeah.
He was a big guy, nice guy.
Lots
Very nice man.
Lots of big guys. But Eric one night in February, 2014, I think it was, goes out for a bit after a 4 to 12, and then stops in a White Castle restaurant in the South Bronx, and he gets jumped by like 6 guys in the restaurant, and this is why you don't go out alone. And Eric, being a tough kid, was kind of holding his own against these guys, and somebody called the police regarding the fight that was going on. And Eric, he had a broken eye socket. You watch the video, they're kicking him with their boots, and he's on the ground. But he gets one guy on the ground out in the parking lot, and he's holding him at gunpoint. And the police show up, and they end up shooting Eric.
Yeah, case of friendly fire was.
And just to, not that it could be much worse, but they hit him through his transfers. And this is where we met another great friend of mine now, Eric's father, Ephraim, is a great friend of ours. And,
Yep, been on many road trips with us.
Yeah, we adopted Ephraim into the.
Well, he became part of our family.
Yeah. But it took 13 days for Eric to pass away in the hospital, and first Ephraim had to make a decision to cut off one of his legs. Then he had to make a decision to cut off his other leg.
Well,
and then he died.
I don't know if you remember, but Tommy Kohler, who was our kicker, ironically, and lost his leg in a shootout.
Yeah.
He had then run the marathon with prosthesis, and I'd called him up to kind of talk Eric up, if you will, to kind of improve his spirits. So Tommy Kohler he says, listen, I'm going to grab my bag of legs and come on up to the hospital. And unfortunately, he passed.
We'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. So, again, you go through those experiences with friends, and the culture of the team was incredibly tight, and I presume it's that way today.
It is. I just had the chance. My son, who played quarterback after I was finished with the team, he came on the team after he graduated college, played quarterback, and then now he's the quarterback's coach. So I went down to one of the tryouts that they just recently had, and it was probably about, 85 guys down there trying out for the team. And it was good to see that the tradition continues, that there's good character, good quality people coming out to be part of something bigger than themselves. Because it takes a lot. You practice 2 days a week. You drive from wherever you got to be. You work up in the Bronx. You got to go out to, now they're practicing out in Queens. It used to be Brooklyn when we played. And then go back to work.
Yeah.
And the job you know, was good to us as far as accommodating us for a switch of tours, which meant we practiced in the daytime, but you still had to show up for the 4 to 12. So it wasn't like you got the day off, but, you know.
No. And nobody practiced on duty.
No.
There were rumors about that, but it just didn't happen.
No.
But I want to fast forward a little bit because I get promoted up the ranks a couple of times, and I miss a couple of years, and I go on one road trip, and I'm hooked on the team, and I'm back playing again. Probably the most fun, stupidest thing I've ever done in my life is play tackle football till I was 50 years old. And,
so you were in shape, but football shape and being in shape are two different things, as you well learned.
Yeah. No, I definitely learned that.
Yeah,
But,
you started breaking things I never heard of.
yeah, I still am. That's just what we do. But eventually I go over to Newark, and Steve comes over to help me out in Newark. And Cory Booker's the mayor, and he offers me the job. And I said, okay, I'll take the job, but the very first tenet of me taking this job is that I'm really going to run the department. I'll keep your politics in mind, but I'm really going to run the department. So he agrees to it. So I come in with my chief of staff, who's Gus, another great friend of ours.
Yep, good man.
And we start interviewing all the chiefs. And the interesting thing about New Jersey, and I'm not sure if this exists in other states, but the police director is a civilian and the chief is a uniform. And the director is only supposed to do personnel and policy while the chief operates operations on a daily basis. So the chief was not a very impressive guy, let's just put it that way. And the thing that I was told was that Newark doesn't operate like that, that I would have operational capabilities and so on and so forth. So we interview a couple of the chiefs, and you know, we come up with like one guy, two guys actually, who look like they might be able to help us out. And there was only about five or six of them. But I said, okay, he's the chief of patrol. I said, what do you need to succeed? And he says, well, I want to get this captain who they sent to Bogeyland, basically. They sent him to a punishment assignment because of Newark politics.
Right.
And
the politics were bad there.
And I said, okay, fine. And I transferred him. And 15 minutes later, the mayor's chief of staff was in my office telling me that I couldn't do that. Yeah. This is my very first day. And I said, no. Yeah, it says right here that I transferred him. So yeah, I can do it. I did do it. And that's what's going to happen. And that's where it started on the very first day.
Right.
And it was uphill sledding the whole way. Yeah. And I think everybody asks what was Newark like in comparison to Chicago or New York, and the biggest difference was there's not a lot of industry in Newark, and I think as a result there's less pie, and they fight harder over the pie because there's less pie. Wow. And you know, I started saying that the acceptable practices here are unacceptable. The political overtones to everything that was happening there was overwhelming. And it really got in the way of success for a while, until such time as Cory Booker was actually forced, because of a whole series of events, to remove the chief, and I obtained the control of everything.
Didn't you have to get appointed to that position? In addition to your other duties?
Yeah, I just assumed it, quite frankly. But they gave him a soft landing. They put him in City Hall because that's the way politics works in some of these places. And, right. And it was very, very disappointing. There was some outright criminals in government over there. One in particular who probably should have gone to jail. I'm shocked that he never did. But they all played that game. Oh. And it was really, really hard to get things done. So why don't you talk a little bit about your experience there.
In Newark?
Yeah.
So I get there in March of 2009, and one of the first taskings that you asked me to do is to develop a gun violence reduction strategy, basically how to reduce the shootings. Now, you had a lot of ideas, I had a lot of ideas, and then we talked to other people. I started having meetings on Tuesday mornings with Major Case, the detectives, after the weekend of, usually over the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we had a lot of shootings, so I wanted to discuss it before I came to you on a Thursday. I wanted to discuss and compare notes with these guys. And the funny thing that I found was these guys didn't compare notes. They were so compartmentalized. It was narcotics didn't talk to gang didn't talk to Major Case didn't talk to Intel, nobody talked to anybody. And they were afraid to share information.
Yeah, so let me just share this. I remember at one of the first Compstats, there was a narcotics-related shooting on a 4 to 12 tour. And we're looking at the maps, because that's what you do. You look at these clusters of crime and you say, what's going on here? And I said, okay, put up the narcotics-related arrests at that location on the 4 to 12 tour.
No.
And the response was, well, narcotics doesn't work on the 4 to 12 tour. And I said, well, do the narcotics dealers work on the 4 to 12?
Right.
Because if they're working,
what a
you're
concept.
going to be working.
What a
How
concept.
about that? So that's some of the stuff that we were up against us. And
Well, most of your captains went home on Friday at like 4 o'clock, and we didn't see them until Monday.
yeah.
Captains and above.
Well, one of the most successful things that we did in Newark was we actually implemented a quality of life program. And I remember speaking with one of the other competent chiefs, and I said, what do we do for quality of life? And he says, well, we arrest everybody. I said, what? I said, so if a guy's standing on the corner drinking a Heineken, and he just got out of working 14 hours in a Chinese kitchen in July, and he's sitting on his porch drinking a Heineken, you put him in jail? He says, well, it's a strong program. I said, so we're taking a cop off the street,
Yeah,
and we're putting somebody in jail for drinking a beer.
man.
Why aren't we giving them tickets? And he says, whoa, I think we've got a couple of hundred boxes of tickets in the warehouse that we could use for that. So we implemented this, okay, we're going to stop arresting everybody, and if they're eligible to receive a ticket, in other words, be properly identified and not have a warrant or be wanted for something else,
Like a criminal court summons.
you give them, you give them a ticket. And the very first week that we implemented that, the best possible scenario that could have happened happened. And two officers are driving down the street, and they see a guy standing on a corner drinking a beer. So they get out to engage him, and eventually they end up frisking him, and they find a gun. So they continue frisking him, and they find a second gun. So they lock him up for the two guns, they take him into the station house, and they put him into the computers, and it turns out that he had shot somebody on that very corner 6 years previous and was there that night to take back his spot. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is drug dealers, people who carry guns and do shootings, also drink beer. And if you interrupt the beer drinking, you can sometimes stop a murder from happening, which is what happened that night.
Yeah, but not all your beer drinkers should be going to jail either.
No,
Right. So.
no. I personally have nothing bad to say about beer. But it was enlightening how unenlightened they were.
Yeah.
It really took...
Well, just the way they looked at the gang problem that they had in Newark. They had over 5,000 gang members, and they wanted to concentrate on 5,000 gang members. Well, what do we have, 1,200 cops?
Yeah.
We couldn't possibly concentrate on 5,000 gang members. And of that cohort, that 5,000, how many are really gangbangers? How many of them are really would shoot you as quick as they look at you?
Right.
I don't know, 50?
Yeah.
100?
Small slice.
Small. So why don't we focus our efforts on that group? And that's exactly what we did. And 50, we looked at 100, but 50 of them were in jail at one time. So
Right.
we only had to concentrate on the 50 that were out of jail.
Right.
And then we got the Essex County prosecutors to assign 2 attorneys just to stay with us and prosecute those 50, the nifty 50, if you remember we called them.
Yeah, and as a result of these things that we put in place, we were getting some traction. And
Yeah.
like I said, I read
34%
I read-
reduction in shootings.
I read in the book that Cory did a great job on violent crime.
He did. Hired the right people.
One of my favorite stories that ever happened in Newark was Mayor Booker used to have these town hall meetings where anybody who was a resident, he would sit at a table with them for 3 or 4 minutes and they could talk to him about whatever they wanted to. So these are big meetings, and naturally he would ask me to go and I would go. And one particular meeting, he calls me over, he says, Garry, come here, I want to introduce you to somebody. This is Bashir. Bashir is the head of the new Black Panther Party here in Newark. I was like, oh, great to meet you, Bashir.
What happened to the old Black Panther Party?
They got old. So I talked to him for a few minutes. I give him my card, and Mayor says to me, wow, I didn't realize that you had such a good bedside manner. I said, well, you know, you learn how to talk to people when you do this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I said to Bashir, I said, look, you want to do something together? I'll work with you as long as we're doing something good. Well, naturally, I never hear from him, right? And about 6 months later, I'm standing outside Weekway High School, and I'm talking to some kids from the school. And I hear somebody behind me say, McCarthy. I turn around, and it's Bashir. I say, hey, Bashir, what's going on? He says, oh, same old thing. I said, well, what's that? He says, we need a Black or Latino police director here in Newark. And I said, didn't somebody once say, judge me not by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character? And Bashir lit up. He was going, that's Dr. King. I said, right. He goes, Ma! May have said a curse word, and turned around and left. I never saw Bashir again. But the overwhelming, you could almost feel racial tension in the air in Newark. And, you know.
Yeah, the groups were definitely pitted against one another.
Yeah.
You know, all the different ethnic groups or race groups, if you will.
Yeah. And everybody fights to hold on to what they got,
Yeah.
which is not getting things done. But
listen, we saved, or you saved, a lot of people in that community
We did.
from getting shot and getting killed. You know.
And then the finances, right? We ended up having to lay off people.
Yeah, that was tough. The mayor, Booker, comes to us at that time and asked us to reduce the budget by about 25%. And, you know, we looked, Gus and you and me, sat around and scratching our heads, and we decided to start consolidating bureaus and chiefs. And we took the gang and made them part of narcotics, which made sense from the get-go. But, you know, when you have all these different fiefdoms, they're all going to dig in and fight.
I think we knocked it down so that we could get away without doing any layoffs.
Right.
If the FOP would agree to everybody taking, what was it, like a $500 pay cut? It wasn't thousands.
They had to
of
make
dollars.
some concessions. They were minimal, and they said no, and that ended up about 150 cops ended up getting laid off.
Like 3 classes in a row that we had just hired.
Right, 50,
We had
50. We did, you know.
We had to lay off.
Yeah.
So
So they sacrificed the young.
they sacrificed the young to get that done. We'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. Speaking of the young, one of those stories that you just can't make up happened in Newark, where there was an off-duty officer who used to do kids' parties, and he'd dress up as a clown.
You told me this story. That's hysterical.
He would dress up as a clown, and he'd treat the kids to, you know, an hour or two of playtime. And he does a party one day, and he's coming out of the party, and he's putting all his clown stuff in his clown car now, and a guy comes up to rob him at gunpoint. And the officer turns and shoots him. And
You can't make that up.
nobody saw this coming, right? This guy said, "Oh, look at this clown! I'm going to go rob him." Yeah. And
Well, do you remember the story? Mikey Diaz came late to a game. We were on a road. Pikachu.
Yeah.
He was dressed up at some community event as Pikachu, and they had a gang initiation. Unfortunately, they didn't realize that it was crazy Mike Diaz in that costume. And Mikey played strong safety for us. And he had to be the toughest guy.
One of the toughest people ever.
Toughest, 165 pounds, but he was pure venom. And he could play. And Pikachu got sly wrapped, and the gang member went running, and there goes Pikachu chasing after him, and all the kids were going crazy chanting, "Pikachu, Pikachu." So we met him at the airport the next morning because he came in late on a later flight, and of course we got the local Pikachu from the one of the video stores at the time. It was a Blockbuster. We borrowed his poster, and we brought it to the airport for him.
So that's time in Newark, but before that, when I was deputy commissioner, Steve had made captain now, and he was number 2 in a precinct in Brooklyn, and we had this plum assignment that I called Steve, and I said, "Steve, I got a job for you," and he says, "What's that?" I said, "Well," I tell him what it is. It's Technical Assistance Response Unit,
Right.
which
at that time I really didn't know the scope of all the work that they did.
And Steve says to me, "Well, I'm going to get a command out here." Oh, no, it's Queens, right? You weren't-
Queens, the 103. I was Danny Mullins XO.
Right.
And Joe Fox was the borough commander.
He says, "Yeah, I'm like 3rd or 4th behind Joey Boombox.
Joey Baker Donuts, I'm waiting right behind him, and
Yeah,
I'm in
and
line.
I'm gonna get a command." And
Yeah.
I looked at the phone and I said, "Steve,
Yeah.
you got to take this job." And I explained to him what it was. We got into a little bit of details. Lo and behold, Steve goes to TARU. It's called TARU,
Right, Technical Assistance Response Unit.
which became the tackle and run
Running
unit.
back unit, yeah. Well,
because
I wanted a lot of good people that I could trust to work with me.
and you got them.
And we were expanding the unit because we were, the biggest thing we had started to do was wire all the housing developments with cameras, if you remember.
Oh yeah.
And we did 3, and then Giuliani, who was the mayor at the time, felt the program was so successful and we got additional dollars from the feds. We did 10 more. And it took us like over 2 years to do 3. And now he wanted to do 10 more within 1 year. So it was a massive undertaking. So I had to increase the personnel in order to, and that's when a lot of guys from the tackle and running back unit came on.
Well, it's funny that you tell that story because the mayor did the same thing to me. At one point, I'm looking at tinkering with personnel and different units, and one of my favorite things for crime reduction is warrant enforcement.
Yeah,
You lock them up now while they're wanted before they commit another crime.
correct.
I don't.
Because usually if you're wanted, you're usually a beggar.
Criminal. Yeah, yeah. So I come up, with a formula, to increase it. I'm making up the numbers. Let's say we had 300 people in warrants. I wanted to increase it by 50, and this would increase our efficiency. Blah 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 blah. So the police commissioner at the time was Bernard Kerrick. He says, "Come on, let's go talk to the mayor." So right there, we walk across the street, go to City Hall, sit down with Mayor Giuliani, and I explained the whole thing to him. And he says, "Well, why only 50?" I said, "Well, because we have to get the equipment, we have to do the training, we have to get the supervision, and all of these things are very important to the success of the operation." And he says, No, just double it." And he turns around and walks out of the room. I was like, wait a second. So now I have to go back and tell the first deputy and the chief of department what just happened. Yeah. And as soon as I tell them, they say, "How are we going to double it? We need the supervisors, we need the training and the equipment." I said, "Yeah, I know, I said that."
Yeah.
But here we are. And I don't think the mayor ever found out, but we never doubled it. We increased the size of it.
No, we went from, I don't know, under 100 to about 145 people.
Well, that's
in TARU.
in TARU. Yeah. I'm talking about warrants, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Same concept.
Yeah, same concept. Exactly.
So he wanted more done, and he wanted it done now.
Yeah.
So from TARU, you spent how much time there?
I was there from 99 to 2002. And then 2002, I got promoted to, I had gotten promoted to deputy inspector. And then Commissioner Kelly at the time wanted me to take a patrol command.
Which we've already talked about is the rite of passage.
It is.
You have
and
to
it
go
should,
through
It
that.
should be. Anybody who's going to go up the chain should really have the command experience. It's a different animal. So I was chosen to go to the 6-6 precinct in Brooklyn, Borough Park, Brooklyn.
Fort surrender.
Well, it didn't surrender under me, but it had surrendered.
It has a very high Hasidic population.
80,000. Our total population is probably close to 300,000 in 3.2 square miles. And of that population, 80,000 Hasidim.
Yeah.
And, you know, as an outsider looking in, I had no idea about this, you know, coming to that command. But you think they're all just one part of one big tribe, one big group.
They're all different.
They are. They all come from the ghettos of Hungary and France and Poland. Those were my two biggest, was Hungary and Poland. The Bobov community and the Satmar were the two biggest sects, if you will. And they don't necessarily like each other.
Yeah.
It's almost a mixed marriage if one member marries a member of the other sect, you know. We've had more than our share of battles at weddings. It's almost like an Irish wedding, you know. So a lot of drinking and a lot of fights. So.
And if they got arrested on a Friday, you were getting phone calls.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you were getting phone calls up to a certain point, then they couldn't call you.
Right.
You almost prayed that the sun went down because Shabbos, and they couldn't call you. But yeah, you tried to get them out before the sun went down because otherwise that person becomes a burden to your department. What do I mean by that? Well, he's going to get released. If he gets released and he's downtown, he cannot get in a car or any mode of transportation to get him back to his command. So how do you get him? Do you walk him safely? Because he's going to be a victim by the time he gets, you know, you remember where Brooklyn Central Brooklyn was.
Yeah.
Wasn't in the, you know, greatest neighborhood at that time. It's all gentrified. Fort Greene area is beautiful. But at the time it wasn't, back in the, you know, early 2000s. And so you couldn't release somebody at 9 o'clock on a Friday night and have him walk to Borough Park, you know, approximately 7-8 miles away. You know, probably wouldn't survive that journey.
So then it was after that eventually you came to Newark with me. And then 15 years ago.
No, I took over after 6/6. I went to Transit Borough Manhattan.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
I was the borough commander there
That's
for
right.
3 years, 05 to 08. I got promoted to inspector, and then I took over your role as the Comstat. I ran Comstat for Phil Pileski. He was your role, Deputy Commissioner Operations.
Correct.
I worked for him. I was the CO of that office.
The transit.
I took over the Jimmy Rogers role,
Right.
or Sean, who was the guy that passed?
Jimmy Malloy?
Jimmy Malloy, not Sean Malloy.
Yeah. The Transit Bureau, Bill Bratton, there were 3 different departments in New York when he got there. There was the NYPD, there was the Transit Police, and there was the Housing Department Police. And he merged all 3 into the NYPD.
In 1995.
He pulled a coup, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Housing Bureau, they kind of came along peacefully, but it seemed as though transit was kicking and screaming.
Well, the biggest thing with the housing, it was a little more easy to assimilate them because you can't move buildings. That building is in your precinct. Whereas a crime occurs on a train, they're in your command and they're out of your command at the next train stop.
Sure.
So it's linear. It's, you know, it just works differently. They also, failure in merger and acquisition, they changed all the you know, I always say, they changed the Indians, but they kept the chiefs, all the old transit chiefs. So their mentality, they never adopted the NYPD way of doing things. They did it the old transit way. Well, 10 years later, I get promoted to inspector, and I'm going to take over the borough commander. And I didn't really want to go to transit, not having any experience there. It ultimately ended up being a great experience, but I kind of was resistant to it at first. So Commissioner Kelly says to me, in his ultimate wisdom, we're sending you there to complete the merge. And I just looked at him, I said, that was 10 years ago. And he goes, exactly why we're sending you there. So I says, okay, I'll let you know.
We'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. One of the fascinating things was when they worked for the Transit Bureau, Department, what was it called before? Oh,
They were the transit police.
Right.
And then they became the Transit Bureau.
Right.
So when I worked there, it was the Transit Bureau.
Right. So as Transit Police, they used to give out things called tab summonses.
Yes. Transit Adjudication Bureau summonses, which were like a
like a $20 fine.
And an administrative fine. It had no criminal court ramifications at all.
Right.
So they couldn't issue a warrant or anything.
So we already talked a little bit about quality of life and how it works.
Right.
And if you're not checking their criminal backgrounds and you're just giving them a tab summons, the city might be collecting $50, but by the same token, we could have a murderer walking out. And guess what? There were a number of high-profile crimes in New York City. There's one in particular that I'm trying to remember that was solved based upon a fingerprint that was taken when somebody jumped a turnstile.
Wow.
So if you're not looking at the people who are fare evading and giving them criminal summonses, you're not accomplishing what we're trying to do. And I'll never forget the chief of transit, just a rockhead. Just, this is how we've done it. This is how we're going.
Yeah, well, you know, Bill Bratton had taken them over. I want to say he was a transit when they were a separate
Chief.
department.
Yeah, he was the chief.
I want to say 93, maybe?
Probably.
Thereabouts. Anyway, his big thing was catch them as they come in.
Right.
Catch the bad guy at the turnstile, you know,
Right.
the turnstile jumpers. Well, fast forward to 2005. They're still their number one strategy. Like 15 years later.
Yeah.
10, 15, whatever the math is. So I said, okay, the first thing I evaluated was, what are my cops doing? Well, they're stopping people at the turnstile. No one had a criminal record. It was just, they're fighting crime by stopping like tourists. I had 12 Hawaiians that went through the gate. I says, what was that, Operation Hawaii 5-0? I mean, you know, this is ridiculous. But one guy knew that, oh, I have to do this, you know, and I'm going to get on a sheet. And he saw 12 tourists. I said, you should have gave him directions on how to get there. You know how many subways there are in Hawaii? That'd be that many.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, some people get it and some people don't. I saw it. We see it virtually everywhere. And some people adopt it immediately. They're like, oh my God, that's, yeah, I get it. I get it. So
Yeah, listen, we didn't come up with these
transit.
ideas. We grew up in that environment, and
Yeah.
we were blessed that we worked with a lot of great mentors and people that showed us the way. And then we, you know, put our own twist on the things, you know.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. 15 years.
15 years, I've been the police commissioner in Floral Park. And when I got there, they were an older department, kind of steeped in tradition, a lot of proud guys, good people. They just had an antiquated way of going about things. So, you know, I took a look-see. I don't go in and turn over the apple cart because you turn over the apple cart. That's just not how I operate. I tried to change things slowly, and I did, and you try to get buy-in from the cops and the sergeants and the lieutenants. And I got a little buy-in. It was, you know, it was always that old cadre that's always going to push, and they're going to wait me out. You know, they're going to. I got a 2-year contract. They'll wait my 2-year contract out.
No place was as bad as Newark, as far as that fighting it.
Yeah.
The union, the head of the captain's union, actually, I got T-boned going into work one day in my car in Newark. And cops came, they were great. They gave this guy a summons. You know, actually, I think I was still playing football at the time, so I was in football shape, so it didn't hurt as much, right, from getting banged around. But the head of the captain's unit tracked the guy down who got the ticket, and he took him to court to draw a complaint against me. The head of the union.
For what purpose?
Just to fight.
He hit you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, I mean,
I didn't experience it. There was
was-
some underhanded stuff that went on with me as well. But by and large, most of the people were good, decent people.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. In Newark, it seemed to be just deeper and thicker,
Yeah.
if you will.
Right. Well, you also were dealing with a lot bigger numbers. I only had 34 sworn.
Yeah.
So now, come 15 years later, I have appointed the 2 lieutenants. I have appointed all 6 sergeants, the 2 detectives, and 19 of the 24 police officers I've hired. So now if something goes wrong in Floral Park, it is my fault. This is what we have developed and bought. And I have some great people working for me now. My 2 lieutenants are wonderful, wonderful guys.
Well, how do you innovate after 15 years in a place?
It is hard. You have to constantly try to reinvent yourself. And we've done a lot. We've accomplished a lot of the goals that I set for myself. Big thing for us is maintaining the quality of life. We live in a beautiful community, a nice community, right on the border of New York City. So we're like a gateway community.
Well, I've found in some places, you don't even know what you know until you hear somebody else say something different.
Right.
And intuitively, and it happened on more than a couple of occasions, where myself and Bob Tracy, who's going to be here next week.
Great man, love Bob.
Yeah, doing a great job in St. Louis.
Fighting a good battle. Where was he in there? Wilmington,
Delaware.
Delaware?
Before that, yeah. He was looking in Biden's garage to see what was.
Did he leave any other paperwork around?
But Gus, who came with me, that poor guy worked with me 5 times. I don't know if you know. When I was the sergeant.
Is he still with Waterfront Commission?
No, I
Did he
think
retire?
that's been disbanded. Yeah.
I know they were looking to disband. They had been looking to disband forever, but
Yeah.
I don't know if they actually did.
But Gus, Bobby, and myself, one time during a meeting in Chicago, somebody said something, and the 3 of us just looked at each other and intuitively knew exactly what we needed to do,
Right.
but we didn't tell anybody until after we huddled.
Right.
Have you found that? The training, that the evolutions, that certainly that I went through,
Yeah.
I'm not even close to being the same person I was in 1981.
Well,
Right.
none of us should be. You know, you hope we, even through the process of osmosis, we should have absorbed something.
Too much football.
Yeah, exactly,
Sometimes that'll change that. But the training that we got and the time that we learned it, I think is just something that you can't replace.
Well, we grew up in a unique time. You got to remember, we worked for some really sharp people. Bill Bratton, Ray Kelly. You know, I'd never want to play. Ray Kelly's playing 3-dimensional chess. I'm playing checkers. Yeah, you know, that's how brilliant of a guy that he is, and some of the strategies he came up with. I mean, he was really responsible. If you go all the way back to David Dinkins as our mayor, with the safe streets.
And that's when crime started to go down in New York.
It did. It did. Dinkins never really got to enjoy the fruits of some of that labor, but they hired a tremendous amount of cops. I think we were up to heyday 40,000 police officers. They're now suffering. They're down to like 32,000. That's 8,000 less police officers to do probably more work than they did back then.
Yeah.
You know. So then, you know, Ray obviously comes back under Bloomberg and does.
Oh, you're on a first name basis now, Ray?
No, I'm not. I am not. I always refer to him, even though I'm a commissioner and you were a commissioner or superintendent, all your titles, we still call him the boss. So.
I still call him the boss too.
Yeah,
I don't refer to him as anything.
No,
different.
no.
But being a wise guy, I couldn't help myself. I was literally the only person on the executive staff who would joke with him.
Right.
Because everybody was so afraid of him. I remember one time I went away for a long weekend, and when I came back, I shaved into a goatee. And I saw one of my former bosses in police headquarters, and he said, "Oh my God, you can grow a beard in the Ray Kelly administration. You must really be in." And at that moment, I said, "I'm keeping it. I don't care. I don't care what my wife thinks about it. I don't care what my kids think about it. I'm keeping the goatee." That afternoon, I go to the executive staff meeting, and Kelly walks in and looks at me like this. He goes, "What's this?" I said, "That's your chin, Commissioner." And he just shook his head and rolled his eyes like, "My God, where did I get this guy from?"
Yeah, I feel I enjoyed a good relationship with him. He was very good to me in my career. He sent me to the FBI National Academy when he was the first step. Sent me to Police Management Institute, which we're both graduates of, from Columbia University's Business School. And then he promoted me. So he always has a seat at the dinner table in the McAllister household, as far as I'm concerned.
Hey, look, going through the changeover from Bloomberg to, from Giuliani to Bloomberg, and Ray Kelly coming back as commissioner it was some rough going for a little while there when I'm at the top of the department.
Right,
and I'm not getting an invite from him coming in. And it just so happened that on his first day when he came through the door, I got a phone call around 10 o'clock. He said, "Come on up." And I'm like, "Oh no, this could be bad." And I come in and, you know, there's nails in the wall where the pictures were. And he says, "Sit, Gary." So I sit on the couch. He says, "Gary, I've been watching what you do. I love how you do it. And I want you to keep doing it." And me being myself, I went, look around, no plastic on the floor. And I just go like this. I go,
Can I leave now?
Can I go now, boss? Are we good? And that started my 5-year relationship working for him. Although I was appointed under Mayor Giuliani, I worked 5 years for him and Mayor Bloomberg.
Right. Wow.
So that kind of says something.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a good mentor to me also.
He was, and then obviously we both worked for Joe Esposito.
Oh man.
Yeah, one of the probably the best men I've ever worked for.
And Joe Dunn.
Yeah, another great man.
Well, we're going to talk about them in the next segment.
Okay.
Because them and a few other people like Father Romano and Monsignor Romano.
Monsignor Romano, don't demote him. My wife always chastises me.
So, all right. Well, this wraps up episode 4 of Behind the Badge with my great friend Steve McAllister. And we're actually going to segue right now into something a heck of a lot more serious than some of the things that we were just talking about. But I'm going to end the show like we always do, which is being a police officer is probably one of the most noble things that a human being can do with their life. And I've had such a great time being a police officer, and I'm sure pretty much we all feel the same way, don't we?
I did. I've had a great career, a very blessed career. Some of my best friends have come as a result of being a police officer. And you get to do things that are really worthwhile. You get to help a lot of people in your career, whether they work for you or you work for them, meaning serving the community.
Yeah.